Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Parts of Oregon are in crisis tonight. If we're a family, some of our members are slamming the door and ready to leave us behind. I'm talking about that Greater Idaho movement. All this week, we've been hearing from folks in eastern Oregon about their frustrations. Some of you in other rural areas say you feel the same way. Some of you in the cities have said they should move and quit complaining. We don't think the effort to move the border and cover eastern Oregon with Idaho really stands a chance of happening, but we do think it's important to listen and hear what the angry members of our family are saying. With that in mind, let's head out to Grant County and meet a business owner who may surprise you. Step inside 1188 Brewing in Grant County, and you'll think you're in a Portland brew pub. Great food, lots of great craft beers.
So I was in the third grade, it was in the 70s, and that's when we moved here. So this is where I grew up.
Shannon Adair and her husband own the place.
I was the dance team coach at the high school for 19 years, and my husband decided he needed a hobby.
Turns out he's very good at that hobby, brewing craft beer.
And this is where we started. It was something that we didn't have in our community. We wanted to build something that really was a place that people could gather and create jobs for people, and it was something that we liked to do.
11 years on, their brew pub in John Day is often packed during the summer and for special events like this Valentine's Day gathering. In 2017, concerned about her town's future, she ran for city council and won.
We've been in decline. Our population has been in decline for decades now, really since the timber industry kind of was annihilated.
In the late 1980s and early 90s, environmentalists successfully lobbied to protect the spotted owl in Oregon, which significantly slowed or stopped timber harvests in the nearby forest. With mills closing and jobs scarce, many people left. In 1990, Grant County had more than 7,800 residents. The most recent number shows it's closer to 7,300, a loss of 581 in the last 20-plus years. The city of John Day lost 156 people over that same time frame. The numbers are profound for a small town. For Shannon Adair, it was a painful lesson in how laws and rules from outsiders can have a devastating impact on rural communities like hers.
They're not seeing it. They don't see that it all of a sudden a thriving community has no way to support their schools, has no way to support the businesses that are here. Has no way, so many of those people, there were programs for people to go back to school, but some of those people were in their 30s, 40s, 50s. Where do those people go? What happens to, that group?
That is the sort of frustration that's fueling the Greater Idaho movement. 11 counties in eastern Oregon have voted to essentially start the process of divorcing Oregon. They want to move the border and become part of Idaho. We're in eastern Oregon to listen and try to get to the bottom of that frustration. Many correctly believe the West Side, with its big cities, hold all the political power in Oregon. There's a feeling Oregon's rural areas have been ignored for years.
We have farming, ranching, we have the Forest Service, BLM, all of that here, and I just don't think that they think of us over here as part of them.
Most people out here we just feel like the West Side doesn't care.
We never feel heard out here.
Which is why it would be reasonable for Shannon Adair to be part of that Greater Idaho bandwagon. But she is not. So if there was a vote tomorrow to become part of Idaho for Grant County, would you say yes or no?
I would say no. I really feel like politics in our country right now are so divided, and I don't think dividing further is the answer. I don't think that having all of the conservatives move to a conservative area and all of the liberals move to a liberal area is the answer. It's not the way our country works.
And, for what it's worth, we don't think it will really actually ever happen. Mm-hmm. But, the reason we're here is because clearly people are angry and have been for a long time.
What I'm hoping is that by it becoming this talking point is that more people will talk about it. I think it's an important issue, and I think that the people that live in our areas have valid concerns. And if our legislators could come together and talk more about some of these laws that are getting passed and have a better understanding of how maybe some of those are necessary in the cities, but maybe they're not necessary out here. So how do we work with each other to accomplish that?
There are some instances where the state has made different rules for rural areas. The minimum wage law is a good example. In July of 2022, the state set the wage at $14.75 an hour for the Portland metro area. But in Oregon's 18 rural counties, the rate is $12.50 an hour. Still, Oregon's minimum wage is way above Idaho's, which is $7.25 an hour. And Oregon lawmakers in March, as we are reporting this, may change the law to let Oregonians pump their own gas. As part of that, they've crafted rules that are less restrictive for rural counties than in Portland. But Shannon said there are plenty of other statewide laws that are one size fits all and infuriate people in rural areas. From gun storage laws to Measure 114, which requires a permit to buy a gun, to Measure 110, which decriminalized user amounts of drugs, they stand as one example after another of the urban side imposing its values and its will upon the rural side.
They don't like to be told what to do by the government. They've lived a long time being able to do things the way they want to, which, right or wrong or good or bad, it doesn't really, that's how smaller rural communities are.
Despite the frustration, this business owner thinks Oregon's rural community should slow down and think deeply about what moving the state line would really mean.
I just think about our personal experience as a brew pub. We also serve hard alcohol here. Well, in Idaho, it's limited on how many liquor licenses could be available. So in our community, according to Idaho law, there could only be 2 liquor licenses for the businesses in our community, and we have 8 in our town. So what kind of impact would that be?
Yeah.
Would people lose their businesses, their ability to have a business? Then you have cannabis. It's legal in Oregon. It's not legal in Idaho. So many businesses would be impacted by that. So many people that use it for medical reasons would be impacted by that. Those are just really small examples of all of the complex line-by-line items that would have to happen for that to be successful.
It's highly unlikely the border will ever move. It would require approval by Idaho and Oregon's legislatures and governors, and then approval by Congress. And even if all that happened, it is possible the fast-growing areas around Boise will create its own urban-rural divide in Idaho.
Exactly. The other reason I wouldn't vote for it is because I really believe that there's no guarantee that Idaho will stay conservative. That is not guaranteed. There are a lot of people moving to Idaho, and not all of them because it's a conservative state. Some are going because it's beautiful. Some are going because there's lower crime.
Homes are less expensive.
Homes are less expensive.
LA or something.
Right, and so, it definitely could move in the same direction that we have in Oregon, where Boise is more liberal and is impacting the rural areas in that manner. So to spend that kind of money and time to actually change the border and then have Idaho change to where you just, now you have Oregon and Idaho, that is a possibility. So I think we need to learn how to work together better and keep the borders where they're at.
I appreciate Shannon taking the time to talk to us. By the way, she served her term on the city council. She's no longer on the city council there. And again, if you're hearing us say and me ask the question of would you vote tomorrow to move the border, that doesn't mean that it's going to happen anytime soon. There's a zillion hurdles to clear, and I don't think, frankly, it will ever happen. But as you're hearing this week, there are smart, caring Oregonians in rural areas who feel they are being ignored. Seems like we should do something about that. Tomorrow night, we'll talk with the Grant County Sheriff about law and order there, and also the former U.S. Attorney for Oregon, who warns all of us that it's dangerous to ignore our rural areas. And we did want to grab a few comments that you sent to us last night following part 2 of our story. Lee says, "I'm sorry, but I'm a liberal Democrat and suffered through 24 years in Utah under right-wing Republicans who were in the majority. I didn't get to change the borders so I could be in a majority." He goes on, "I moved to Oregon. Republicans in Oregon don't get to change the borders either, and I resent their harping about values as if they are somehow superior." Jane chimed in with something similar. "Okay, so you feel you aren't being heard as a Republican in a Democratic state? I used to live in a red state and never felt heard. It happens. I moved here." And how about this from Eileen? Eastern Oregon shouldn't feel like they're the only ones being ignored. For those of us who are moderate Democrats or Republicans, it seems like only the extremists get nominated, so we are left out regardless of who ultimately gets elected. Thanks to each of you who wrote in and called us about this. We are getting hundreds of emails from you, and we want more. What are your feelings about the Greater Idaho movement? If you've already let us know, we're good, but if you haven't, please do let us know. And do you have any thoughts on part 3? That's the part you just saw, that report there, if I could say that. So let us know. We do read your emails and we do listen to the voicemails. You can email us at thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090. And if you missed parts 1 or 2 of our Eastern Oregon listening tour, you can watch them right now on our streaming channel, KGW+. It can be found on Roku or Amazon Fire. Add it to your homepage so that you can watch segments or full episodes of the story anytime you want. And you can also head to the KGW YouTube channel to find our content. It's updated every single weekday. Now, let's talk about semiconductors and the massive piece of legislation that's a little bit controversial and is moving through Oregon's legislature very fast. Today, Senate Bill 4 passed the full Senate by a vote of 21-8, with one senator excused. That was Democrat Chris Gorsuch of Gresham, for those of you wondering. The bill is fueled by the federal CHIPS bill passed by Congress last year. That authorizes $52 billion in grants. The federal law is an attempt to rebuild American-based manufacturing in the semiconductor industry. As one of Oregon's largest industries, getting a piece of that $52 billion pie, that is a big deal. Here's how the money shakes out in the bill as it stands now. And let's just say this is the less controversial part. $210 million total, $190 million in state money would go to support applications by Oregon semiconductor companies for a piece of that $52 billion. $10 million would go to local governments to help prepare land for semiconductor development. And the final $10 million would go to University Innovation Research Fund. That's to help train the next generation of chip workers. Companies can apply for grants or loans of up to $50 million. For every $1 million they get, though, they must commit to job creation within Oregon, with 65% of the jobs being permanent and paying at least the median income for their location, or they have to generate at least $1.25 million in state and local revenues. But now let's talk about the more controversial part of Senate Bill 4. We told you the goal is to make land available quickly for semiconductor companies, and if this bill becomes law, and I think it will bring the biggest change in Oregon's land use laws in half a century. It will give Governor Tina Kotek what we are calling a superpower. It will allow her to designate certain plots of land needed for chip factories and take away the land use restrictions that would ordinarily make it impossible to build there. The governor will have the power to issue an executive order and move a plot of land that is outside the urban growth boundary into the boundary. That boundary is what now limits growth on the outside edges of cities and towns across Oregon. She will be able to do that with up to 8 sites, 2 that are any size larger than 500 acres, and 6 that are up to 500 acres. The governor must hold one public hearing near the site before bringing it into the urban growth boundary and take comments for 20 days. So, yeah, this bill has some pretty big implications. And some of you may be thinking that surely something like this involving land use laws will be challenged in court if it passes the legislature. And the answer is, yeah, you're probably right. But an amendment to the bill from last week narrows the scope of a challenge like that. The Oregonian newspaper reports industry backers worried that lawsuits could delay development for years, and that would scare off companies. So the new bill would not allow those suits to toil away in the court system for months or even years. Instead, they'll be fast-tracked straight to the Oregon Supreme Court, which basically means if you're going to challenge the governor after she picks a plot of land, you get one chance to fight in the state's highest court. Now, those who love open land and farmland are furious at the implications. The possibility that protected farmland could be changed into a setting for a semiconductor plant. One of the co-chairs of the legislature's Committee on the Semiconductors, though, previously told us, despite the governor's new superpower, land will not be taken from a farmer who does not want to sell. And from what we're hearing, there is real bipartisan momentum to get this bill passed through the session and quickly. It's expected to have its first reading in the House of Representatives tomorrow, and you can bet it's going to go through. Our past coverage has focused on the lawmakers who are pushing for this to happen. We wanted to hear from someone in the legislature now who does not want this bill to pass. So we got in touch with Republican Senator Daniel Bonham of the Dalles, who voted against Senate Bill 4 today. He said the legislature should not outsource its role and responsibilities to the executive branch, and continued by stating the legislature continues to treat symptoms in lieu of directly tackling the underlying systemic challenges and barriers to development that are inherent to our current land use laws. Bottom line, not all land is equal, and I don't think the legislature should trust this decision to the discretion of the governor. So there's that. Now, what do you think about Senate Bill 4? It has bipartisan support, but it needs to pass the House before it heads to Governor Kotek's desk for her signature. Let us know what you're thinking about that. Send an email. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.
Up next on The Story, the city of Portland ran out of money to clear homeless camps on ODOT property months before new funding is set to kick in.
Oh, is that why they stopped?
And after a plea by Mayor Wheeler to Governor Tina Kotek, there is more funding on the way, but it's just a one-time thing.
I'll just migrate to the next spot like we did last time.
Why the governor did not give Wheeler all that he wanted, and what the city is saying about the budget for camp removals on ODOT property moving forward, when The Story returns.
Now to our homeless crisis and the camps piling up along the freeways and interstates. Earlier this year, the city ran out of money to remove camps on ODOT property. So no one has touched those camps for nearly 2 months. But now the governor is getting involved, allowing more money to go towards removing the tents. But as Blair Best shows us, homeless people say they're just going to keep moving to the next available spot, wherever that might be.
The art of blending in is something Joanne Carter has perfected throughout her time on the streets.
Fly under the radar and just keep our fingers crossed.
In full camouflage, she fights the feeling of comfort while trying to keep her camp from standing out.
Because the second you get comfortable, it seems like it's the second that they clear you.
She's been homeless for about 4 years, during which her camp has been cleared by city crews numerous times.
It was crazy for about, 2 months it went on. Like every week, a different little area was getting swept.
That all stopped in February when she moved her tent to this site off I-5 near Delta Park, which is on Oregon Department of Transportation property. It was around the same time the city ran out of money to clear camps on ODOT rights-of-way.
Oh, is that why they stopped?
ODOT gives the city of Portland $2 million a year to remove camps on its land that falls within city limits. The city is responsible for managing that money, which should last them until June 30th. Back in late January, it ran out, and as a result, the majority of camp cleanups stopped on ODOT rights-of-way. So Mayor Ted Wheeler asked the governor for $1 million extra to continue those cleanups. Governor Kotek then directed ODOT change its agreement with the city to add a one-time additional $600,000. Because of this, those camp removals will now start up again on April 1st.
Why don't they spend that money and resources?
Governor Tina Kotek says while she isn't completely opposed to camp removals, she fears they're a waste of money when people like Joanne are being moved from camp to camp instead of shelter or housing. Do you have a plan if the city comes and clears your campsite here?
I'll just migrate to the next spot like we did last time.
She says she would only take a shelter bed if there was a long-term solution attached.
I want to plan so that I don't come back. I don't want to come back here.
The city is asking the state for more money overall when it comes to campsite removals on ODOT property. Currently, those removals account for 40%, nearly half of all campsite removals in Portland. So the city is arguing that their current funding doesn't match this growing need. Blair Best, KGW News.
Thank you, Blair. If you're a renter or a landlord, you'll want to stick around for this next story. Lawmakers in Oregon are looking at a bill to strengthen rent controls, potentially capping rent increases to a lower rate than they are now. We'll explain what else the bill would do when the story returns.
Coming up on KGW News at 6:30, taking a look at the toll of Portland gun violence on black men and teens.
What I see out here is a lot of misery, a lot of sorrow, and mostly just a whole bunch of trauma for our youth.
We talked to one of the groups trying to stop the cycle and hoping for more help to expand their reach. That's next at 6:30.
We know a number of you operate as landlords. You've told us in your many voicemails and emails. This next story, sorry landlords, you're not going to enjoy it. But if you're a renter, well, this could be music to your ears. Oregon lawmakers are considering strengthening rent controls and closing what some call loopholes at a time when inflation means that some tenants are seeing legal rent hikes as high as 14%. But as Catherine Cook reports, some opposed to the bill warn it could have unintended consequences.
I'm not joking when I say people like me are going to be the new face of homelessness in Oregon.
Catherine Chambers was among the many Oregon renters who sat before lawmakers Wednesday. Robin McMain is another. She drove up from Brookings to represent the seniors in her mobile home community.
To make this clear, everyone donated money in order to get me to be able to come up here and talk to you about this today.
They all support Senate Bill 611. If passed, it would limit annual rent increases in Oregon to 3% plus inflation, with a max total increase of 8%. Back in 2019, lawmakers limited rent increases to 7% plus inflation with no total limit. With inflation what it is these days, that means some renters are staring at a possible 14.6% rent increase this year.
I live with the constant stress of knowing that if my landlord raises my rent by the allowable 14.6%, I will be priced out of my home. My fixed income is just above the threshold to qualify for any assistance, but not enough income to pay that kind of rent increase.
Several of us are not going to go see our grandkids this year because we can't afford the travel or turned our thermostats down. I have a 94-year-old woman that's wearing a coat every day.
Those who support SB 611 suggest it would provide relief to renters without sacrificing the development of new housing. Those who oppose it say nothing could be further from the truth.
If anyone thinks that continuing to make being a landlord in Oregon not just difficult, but unfeasible in ways such as this, then I'm here to respectfully tell you that you're fueling the exact fire that you claim to be trying to put out.
Kennedy Amundson owns Propagate Property Management, which serves Yamhill, Polk, and Marion counties. If 611 passes, she believes it would make it hard for housing providers to keep up with repairs in their units and could drive investors to take their money out of state.
Continuing to house Oregonians at the sole expense of those providing their housing is not sound public policy and is not a sustainable way to address housing instability. We need to focus on permanent rent assistance and increasing supply.
For now, renters like Catherine Chambers bide their time and hope.
I wake up every day and go to sleep every night worrying about keeping a roof over my head.
Catherine Cook, KGW News.
There are a few other key components, Catherine tells us, that we should know about with this bill. New buildings would only be exempt from rent control for 3 years as opposed to 15 years like now. If a landlord evicts a tenant without cause or decides to sell or tear down a home while there's still an active lease, they'd be forced to pay tenants 3 months' rent for relocation assistance. Right now, they only have to pay for 1 month's rent in those situations. The bill is currently in the Senate Committee on Housing and Development and has a work session scheduled for Monday morning at 8 a.m. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, the story, our story, well,